Any theory is a collection of many hypotheses with lots of data supporting each hypothesis, built by many different scientists, and is generally accepted as true. The theory of evolution is one such theory. And if you start to look at the data that's been collected and the evidence to support this theory, the first one that people think of is the fossil record. Even Charles Darwin, when he was developing his theory of natural selection, before he went on the SS Beagle and traveled around the world, he was in the Museum of Natural History in London, and he looked at giant fossils of Glyptodons, which were ancient armadillos that are several feet long. And as he was doing his voyage, he looked at present-day organisms, armadillos that he saw today in South America, and he saw that they looked almost exactly like them, just smaller and with a little bit more modification to them. So he could see a connection between present-day organisms and similar fossils from the past. And that's sort of the idea when you look at the fossil record. You can see a sort of chronology. This is the evolution of the horse, and modern-day horses have a certain body type, and as you go backward in time, when you find similar fossils, you see the same body type and the same morphology, and as it gets further and further back in time, the horse seems to be smaller and smaller, but very similar body type. And that's what the fossil record actually shows. So why are there differences? Why do things evolve like that? Well, the biggest thing is that the environment dictates what happens with evolution. Two very closely related species, if they live in different environments, can look very different. So you take, for instance, a tropical jungle and the desert from the American Southwest. In the tropical jungle, you're going to find black panthers, which are very closely related to cougars or mountain lions, but they look different from one another because they live in different environments. This is what you call divergent evolution. So as they're evolving, they sort of evolve to better fit their habitat. On the other side, you can have very similar structures developing from not closely related organisms if they live in the same type of environment. So here, this is what you call analogous structures. If you look at a dolphin and a tiger shark, for instance, they both have fins on the side. These are called pectoral fins. They both have dorsal fins on the top. They both have a tail, which is called a caudal fin. The shark is a fish, not closely related to the mammal, which is a dolphin. One of the big differences is the shape of the tail. A shark's tail, like all fish, is vertical, and the dolphin's is horizontal and flat. But they both have this same similar streamlined body shape. All of those are what we call analogous structures because they have the analogy of using the same function in that same type of habitat. This is different than a homologous structure. Analogous means that they have the same type of function in a similar habitat. Homologous means that it shows evolutionary relatedness. It shows common ancestry because the structures are similar but maybe have different functions depending on the environment, and they're coming from the same evolutionary tree. So if you look at this picture, for instance, you've got fish, birds, reptiles, mammals, and amphibians. All of them have the same bones found in their forelimb, although the bones have a different shape depending on what the structure of the forelimb is that they're using it for. So a bird wing is homologous to the front leg of a lizard, which is homologous to the front leg of a rabbit, and they all have slightly different structure because they use them differently. That shows that they came from the same evolutionary tree. That shows common ancestry. Another example of something that would show common ancestry is a vestigial structure. Vestigial, the root of the word, kind of means the vestiges of that structure still exist, the leftover remnants of it. A couple of examples there. If you look at a whale, whales don't have any back legs, but they do still have pelvic bones and femur. If you look at a snake, for instance, they don't have any legs, but they also have a pelvic bone and a femur. So it shows the common ancestry to the lizard, or closest relative to a whale is actually a bear, but to other mammals and to other reptiles, you can still see the vestiges of those. One commonly asked question is, if they don't have any purpose anymore, why are they still there? Why haven't they completely disappeared? Well, that's kind of a Lamarckian type of approach to things, thinking that if the legs are no longer used, they would just shrink away and disappear. Well, if the legs were there and it wasn't being used, perhaps they would be in the way. You know, if a whale still had legs sticking out and it only swam, it wouldn't be as streamlined in the water, so that might be an evolutionary disadvantage. So the advantage comes for a whale that's born with smaller and smaller legs, or even no legs. That's the beneficial adaptation that will get passed on. At some point, it comes to the point where if the bones are there and have no effect, there's no real advantage to not having those bones. So that's probably why they still hang around and you still see the vestiges of those organs. Another sample of evidence for evolution is if you look at the embryos of different organisms. You see these embryonic similarities. So here you have examples of a fish. The next row down is a salamander. The next row down is a turtle, a chicken, and a human. And you can see if you look all the way on the right that they all look very different from one another at this stage in their development, but the further back in their development you go, the more similar those embryos start to look. They all start as a single egg that gets fertilized, and then as they start to develop, you can see there's almost no difference at all in this first stage of development to any of those organisms, although they're going to look very different. Again, that shows common ancestry. It shows how everything sort of starts the same and then developmental changes occur differently as the organism ages. The last piece of evidence that we're looking at is DNA similarities, and this is what's used more than anything now to sort of classify organisms in terms of evolutionary relatedness. The idea is DNA is a code. That's all it is a code for how to make proteins. And so if organisms have the same code, they make the same proteins. The proteins are going to do the same things in their body. They're going to have the same structure, and their bodies are going to function the same way. So the more similar the DNA, the more similar they are in terms of relationships to one another. If you look, for instance, at human hemoglobin protein, the more similarly related organisms in terms of evolution have the least number of differences in their protein structure. So a gorilla has only one difference in amino acids in the protein hemoglobin. Rhesus monkey has 8, mouse has 27, and you get all the way down here to a lamprey, which is a type of a fish, and there's 125 differences in their hemoglobin. All of these organisms have the protein hemoglobin, but it's a different version because it's been modified in different ways as evolution has progressed. So that shows the evolutionary relatedness between organisms with similar DNA making similar proteins. All of these pieces of evidence put together makes up the theory of evolution and gives the explanation of how organisms show common ancestry with each other and how they evolve and change and are modified from one generation to the next through natural selection.